The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum as I sorted through the mail. At 63, I'd developed certain routines that kept me grounded, especially since Robert's passing 2 years ago. The familiar weight of bills and catalogs in my hands, the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the lingering scent of this morning's coffee. These small constants had become my anchors. My name is Dorothy Hamilton. I'm 63 years old, and I thought I knew who my real friends were. That illusion shattered completely when I opened what I assumed was a misdirected piece of mail. The envelope was addressed to Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, but had somehow ended up in my mailbox on Maple Street. Patricia lived 3 houses down, and we'd been close friends for over 15 years. I'd planned to walk it over after lunch, maybe stay for tea like we often did. But something made me pause as I held the cream-colored envelope up to the light streaming through my lace curtains. This story changed my life forever. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Where are you watching from? The return address caught my eye immediately. It was from Janet Morrison, a woman I'd met several times at Patricia's book club gatherings. Janet had always seemed pleasant enough, with her perfectly styled silver hair and careful way of speaking, though I'd noticed she had a tendency to lean in close when discussing other people's business. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the envelope over. The flap had come partially unsealed, probably from the humidity we'd been having all week. I could see a folded piece of Janet's expensive stationery peeking through the gap, her distinctive purple ink visible on the cream paper. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But something about the secretive nature of the correspondence, the way it had ended up in my possession, felt like more than mere coincidence. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I leaned against the kitchen counter. Dearest Patricia, the letter began in Janet's flowing script. I hope this finds you well. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding poor Dorothy Hamilton, and I wanted to share some additional thoughts. My blood ran cold as I read those words. Poor Dorothy Hamilton. I set my coffee mug down with shaking hands, the ceramic making a sharp clink against the Formica countertop. The letter continued. You were absolutely right when you said Robert didn't just leave because of his health issues. I've been telling the ladies at Bridge Club exactly what you told me, that Dorothy was simply impossible to live with. The constant nagging, the way she controlled every aspect of that poor man's life. It's no wonder he couldn't stand being in the same house with her toward the end. The kitchen seemed to spin around me. The familiar yellow walls, the ceramic roosters I'd collected over the years, the refrigerator covered with photos of family gatherings. Everything blurred as tears filled my eyes. Robert hadn't left me. Robert had died of pancreatic cancer right here in our home, in our bedroom, with me holding his hand every single day through his final months. I sank into one of the wooden kitchen chairs, the letter crinkling in my grip. Patricia Hendricks, the woman I'd trusted with my deepest grief, had been spinning lies about my marriage to anyone who would listen. And Janet Morrison was apparently her eager accomplice, spreading these fabrications throughout our entire social circle. The sound of a car door slamming in my driveway made me look up through the window. My daughter, Sarah Hamilton, was walking up the brick path, her nurse's uniform suggesting she was stopping by between shifts at the hospital. At 38, Sarah had inherited her father's kind eyes and practical nature, along with my stubborn streak when it came to protecting family. "Mom!" Sarah called as she let herself in through the back door, her keys jingling against the doorframe. "I saw your car in the driveway and thought I'd stop by to check on you." "You look pale. What's wrong?" I held up the letter with trembling fingers, unable to find the words to explain what I'd just discovered. Sarah's face shifted from concern to confusion as she took the paper from my hands, her eyes scanning the purple ink quickly. "This is about you," she said slowly, sinking into the chair across from me. "Mom, this woman is telling people that Dad left you? That you were impossible to live with?" The afternoon light was fading now, casting the kitchen in deeper shadows. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance, children playing in the street, the normal sounds of life continuing while my world had just been turned upside down. "Patricia has been my friend for 15 years, I whispered, my voice hoarse with emotion. "She was at the funeral, Sarah. She held my hand during the service. She brought casseroles for weeks afterward. How could she be saying these things about your father and me?" Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her palm warm against my cold fingers. "We need to figure out how widespread this has gotten," she said firmly. "And we need to talk to someone who can help us understand what Patricia's motivations might be." Almost as if summoned by our conversation, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw the familiar name, Helen Rodriguez. Helen had been my neighbor for over a decade, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. She'd also been one of the few people who'd truly understood the depth of my devotion to Robert during his illness. "Dorothy?" Helen's voice was tight with concern when I answered. "I need to talk to you about something I overheard at the grocery store today. Can I come over?" 20 minutes later, Helen was sitting in my living room, her gray hair still damp from the light rain that had started falling. The three of us sat surrounded by the familiar comfort of my home. The Afghans I'd crocheted, the family photos on every surface, the books Robert and I had collected together over 40 years of marriage. "I was in line behind Margie Peterson and Carol Wright," Helen began, her voice careful and measured. "They were talking about you, Dorothy, saying things about how Robert had to move out before he died because you were so difficult to live with. They seemed to think this was common knowledge." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "This is insane. Dad never left this house. He died in the bedroom upstairs, surrounded by family who loved him." Helen nodded grimly. "I set them straight immediately. But Dorothy, this story is spreading. Someone has been very deliberately painting a picture of your marriage that's completely false." I looked around at these two women, my daughter and my trusted neighbor, and felt a surge of gratitude despite the devastating discovery. The letter from Janet to Patricia was still lying on my coffee table, damning evidence of a betrayal I never could have imagined. "The question is," I said slowly, "why would Patricia do this? What does she gain from destroying Robert's memory and my reputation?" Sarah picked up the letter again, studying it more carefully. "There's something else here, Mom. Janet mentions that Patricia has been talking to the ladies at Bridge Club and spreading this story there too. This isn't just casual gossip. This sounds coordinated." Helen leaned forward, her teacher's instincts clearly engaged. "Dorothy, think back to the weeks after Robert's funeral. Did Patricia ask you about anything specific? Your finances? Your plans? Anything that seemed odd at the time?" As I sat there in my living room, surrounded by 40 years of memories and the two people I trusted most in the world, I tried to piece together the puzzle of Patricia's betrayal. The rain was picking up outside, pattering against the windows like tears, and that's when the pattern snapped into place. Suddenly, the memory hit me like a physical blow. I set down my teacup with shaking hands, the china rattling against the saucer. "The insurance money," I whispered. Sarah looked up sharply from where she'd been reading Janet's letter again. "What about it, Mom?" About 3 weeks after the funeral, Patricia came over with one of those tuna casseroles. She stayed for hours, kept asking me how I was managing financially. At the time, I thought she was being caring, making sure I wasn't struggling. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to recall every detail. She asked specifically about Robert's life insurance policy, whether it was enough to keep me comfortable. Helen's expression darkened. What did you tell her? Everything, I said, feeling foolish now. I was so grateful to have someone to talk to about my worries. I told her about Robert's pension, the life insurance settlement, how relieved I was that I wouldn't have to sell the house or worry about medical bills anymore. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, and I could see her reflection in the glass, her face tight with anger. So Patricia knew you were financially secure? Sarah said, turning back to face us. That you weren't the struggling widow she could paint you as. There's more, I continued, the memories flooding back now that I'd opened that door. She kept pushing, asking if Robert had been worried about leaving me alone, if he'd expressed any regrets about our marriage near the end. She made it sound like she was trying to help me process grief, but now it sounds like she was fishing for ammunition? Helen finished grimly. I nodded, feeling sick. I told her how Robert had apologized to me during those last weeks for being such a burden, how guilty he felt about the cost of his treatments and the way his illness had changed our daily routine. I thought I was sharing intimate, beautiful moments of our marriage with a trusted friend. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet, and she twisted Dad's expressions of love and concern into evidence that he found you difficult to live with. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, the full scope of Patricia's calculated betrayal settling over us like a heavy blanket. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows of the home where Robert and I had built our life together. But why? I asked again, my voice breaking slightly. Patricia has plenty of money, her own social circle. What could she possibly gain from destroying my reputation? Helen reached over and squeezed my hand. Some people feed on drama, Dorothy. Or maybe she's jealous of something about your life that you don't even realize. Jealous of what? I'm a widow living alone with my memories and my books. Sarah came back to sit beside me on the couch, her hand finding mine. Mom, you and Dad had something real. 40 years of genuine partnership, right up until the end. You were the couple everyone looked up to. Even in his illness, Dad never stopped telling people how lucky he was to have you. That was true. Even as the cancer ravaged his body, Robert would introduce me to nurses and doctors as the love of my life and the strongest woman I know. The memory brought fresh tears to my eyes. Maybe that's what Patricia couldn't stand, Helen said thoughtfully. Some people can't bear to see others have what they've never found themselves. I thought about Patricia's own marriage to Frank, how they'd always seemed more like roommates than partners, how she'd often made cutting comments about overly sentimental couples whenever Robert and I would hold hands or share a private joke. Whatever her reasons, Sarah said firmly, we need to figure out how to stop this before it spreads any further. I picked up Janet's letter again, scanning the neat handwriting for clues I might have missed. Something in the final paragraph caught my attention. Helen, listen to this. Janet writes, I thought you should know what Patricia is saying, especially since she mentioned she's planning to talk to Pastor Williams about her concerns for Dorothy's well-being. The blood drained from my face. Pastor Williams had officiated at Robert's funeral, had known us both for over 20 years. If Patricia poisoned him against me with her lies, she's going to the church. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She's taking this to Pastor Williams. Sarah's face went white. When was this letter dated, Mom? I checked the postmark with trembling fingers. 4 days ago. The realization hit all three of us at the same time. If Patricia was planning to approach Pastor Williams with her fabricated story about Robert leaving me, she might have already done it. The thought of my pastor, a man who had counseled Robert and me through difficult times and celebrated our anniversary with us just last year, believing such horrible lies about our marriage was almost unbearable. But then, I remembered something else that changed everything I thought I knew about Patricia's motives. Mom, what is it? Sarah asked, noticing the change in my expression. You look like you just remembered something important. I set Janet's letter down carefully, my mind racing back to a conversation I'd had with Patricia just 2 weeks after Robert's funeral. At the time, I'd been so consumed with grief that I hadn't paid much attention to what she'd said, but now her words took on an entirely different meaning. I need to tell you both something, I said slowly. Something Patricia said to me right after your father died that I'd completely forgotten about until now. Helen leaned forward in her chair. What did she say? She came over one evening, supposedly to bring me a casserole. I was still in that fog you get in after losing someone, you know? Barely functioning. Anyway, she was sitting right here in this living room, and she started talking about how she and Frank were thinking about renewing their vows for their upcoming 30th anniversary. Sarah frowned. That doesn't sound so bad. Wait, there's more. I took a deep breath, remembering Patricia's exact words. She asked me if I thought Pastor Williams would be willing to do the ceremony. When I said of course he would, she got this strange look on her face and said, Well, I wasn't sure. Frank thinks Pastor Williams doesn't really approve of marriages like ours. He thinks the pastor only respects those fairy tale relationships like you and Robert had. Helen's eyebrows shot up. What did you say to that? I told her that was nonsense, that Pastor Williams had counseled dozens of couples over the years and never judged anyone. But then she said something that really stuck with me, even through my grief. She said, It must be nice to be put on a pedestal like that. Some of us have had to work a lot harder at our marriages without getting any recognition for it. Sarah's mouth fell open. She was jealous that you and Dad were seen as the ideal couple at church. I think so. And there's more. The memory was becoming clearer now, like fog lifting from a mirror. When I tried to reassure her that Pastor Williams would be honored to renew their vows, she got even more agitated. She said, Easy for you to say. You never had to worry about people whispering about your marriage. You never had to wonder if people thought your husband settled for less than he deserved. Helen shook her head in disbelief. So she's rewriting history to make herself feel better about her own insecurities. But Mom, that still doesn't explain why she's spreading lies about Dad leaving you, Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. That's so much worse than just being jealous. I closed my eyes, trying to piece together Patricia's twisted logic. I think I understand now. If she can convince people that even Robert and I had problems, that our marriage wasn't as perfect as everyone thought, then suddenly her own marriage doesn't look so lacking by comparison. That's sick, Sarah said flatly. She's destroying your reputation and Dad's memory just to make herself feel better about her own choices. Helen stood up and began pacing again. Dorothy, we have to assume she's already talked to Pastor Williams. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I don't know, I admitted, feeling overwhelmed. How do you fight something like this? If I go to Pastor Williams and try to defend myself, Won't that just make me look desperate? Like I'm protesting too much? Sarah took my hand again. Mom, Pastor Williams knew you and Dad for 20 years. He saw you together through good times and bad. He was there when Dad was sick, remember? He saw how devoted you were to each other right up until the end. But what if Patricia was convincing enough? What if she planted just enough doubt in his mind? My voice was getting shaky again. What if he starts to question everything he thought he knew about us? Helen stopped pacing and turned to face me. Then we need to be smarter about this than Patricia is. We need to think about what she actually told him and how we can address it without looking defensive. How do we even find out what she said? I asked. We don't go in blind, Sarah said thoughtfully. We start with what we know. Janet's letter mentioned that Patricia was planning to talk to Pastor Williams about her concerns for your well-being. That suggests she's not just spreading gossip, she's positioning herself as a worried friend. The phone rang suddenly, making all three of us jump. I looked at the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It's Pastor Williams, I whispered. The phone continued ringing, each shrill tone making my stomach clench tighter. My hand hovered over the receiver, frozen between answering and letting it go to voicemail. Answer it, Mom, Sarah said quietly. Better to know what you're dealing with than to spend the night wondering. Helen nodded in agreement. Sarah's right, and we're right here with you. I picked up on the fifth ring, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Hello? Dorothy, hello. I hope I'm not calling too late. Pastor Williams' familiar voice carried its usual warmth, but I found myself analyzing every syllable for signs of judgment or doubt. Not at all, Pastor. How are you? I'm well, thank you. Dorothy, I was wondering if you might have some time to chat tomorrow. Perhaps we could meet at the church, say around 10 in the morning? My mind raced. His tone seemed normal, but the formal request for a meeting sent alarm bells clanging in my head. In all the years I'd known him, our conversations had always been casual, spontaneous. This felt different. Of course, I managed. Is everything all right? There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Oh yes, everything's fine. I just thought it might be nice to catch up. It's been too long since we've had a proper conversation. After we hung up, I stared at the phone as if it might offer some clue about what tomorrow would bring. Sarah and Helen were watching me expectantly. He wants to meet tomorrow morning at the church, I said. He said he wanted to catch up, but it didn't sound casual. It sounded like he was being careful about what he said. That could mean anything, Helen said, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe he's planning something nice for the congregation and wants your input. Sarah made a skeptical sound. Or maybe Patricia got to him first. The thought that had been lurking in the back of my mind suddenly crystallized, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. What if this isn't just about the vow renewal anymore? What if Patricia convinced him that I'm somehow unfit to be involved in church activities? What if he's going to ask me to step back from my volunteer work? The possibility hit me like a physical blow. The church had been my anchor since Robert died. Teaching Sunday school, helping with the women's auxiliary, organizing the monthly potluck dinners. These activities had given structure and purpose to my days when everything else felt meaningless. Mom, you're spiraling, Sarah said gently. We don't know what he wants to talk about. But I do know Patricia, I said, my voice growing stronger as anger began to overtake fear. I know how her mind works. She doesn't just want to make me look bad. She wants to isolate me. If she can turn Pastor Williams against me, if she can make him question my character, then she wins completely. Helen sat back down beside me. Dorothy, I've watched you throw yourself into church work for the past 2 years. You've been there for every family crisis, every funeral, every celebration. You've probably logged more volunteer hours than anyone else in that congregation. Patricia's probably been volunteering too, I said bitterly, making herself indispensable while quietly undermining me. Sarah leaned forward. Mom, what's the worst thing she could have told him? Really think about it. She can't prove Dad left you because there's no evidence of that. She can't point to any actual behavior that shows you're impossible to deal with. I considered this. She could have twisted things, made my grief look like instability. Suggested that I'm not handling Robert's death well, that I'm becoming difficult or unreliable. Are you? Helen asked bluntly. Have you been unreliable? No, I said immediately. I've never missed a commitment. I've never caused drama or conflict. Then you have nothing to worry about, Helen said firmly. Pastor Williams isn't stupid. He's known you for decades. But as we talked, I found myself mentally reviewing every interaction I'd had at church over the past few months, searching for moments that Patricia might have witnessed and later distorted. Had I seemed too emotional during a particular hymn? Had I been too quiet during coffee hour? Had my grief ever shown in ways that could be misinterpreted as instability? I keep thinking about last month's auxiliary meeting, I said slowly. We were planning the fall festival, and I disagreed with Patricia about the budget for decorations. I thought we should spend less, be more conservative with the church's money. She wanted something more elaborate. That sounds like a reasonable disagreement, Sarah said. But I was firm about it, maybe too firm, and my position won. The other women sided with me. The memory took on a sinister new meaning. What if she saw that as me being controlling, impossible to work with? Helen shook her head. You're giving her too much credit and yourself too little. Standing up for fiscal responsibility isn't being impossible. But what if that's not how she presented it to Pastor Williams? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how cleverly Patricia had positioned herself. By expressing concern for my well-being, she could present herself as a caring friend, while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about my stability. Any examples she gave of me being difficult would be wrapped in sympathy, making them seem more credible rather than malicious. I feel so naive, I said quietly. All this time, I thought she was just jealous of my marriage. I never imagined she was actively working against me. You're not naive for assuming the best of a friend, Sarah said. That speaks well of your character, not poorly. But it left me vulnerable. While I was grieving and trying to rebuild my life, she was systematically undermining my reputation. The betrayal felt almost as sharp as the grief I'd experienced after losing Robert. At least death was honest in its cruelty. This felt like a violation of everything I thought I knew about friendship and trust. Tomorrow's going to tell us everything, I said, trying to steel myself for whatever was coming. Either Pastor Williams still believes in my character, or Patricia has successfully poisoned that relationship too. That night, sleep came in fragments. I found myself staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, watching shadows from the street lamp dance across the familiar water stain that had been there since I was 12. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, sounds that had once been comforting but now seemed to echo my restless thoughts. When morning finally arrived, gray light filtering through the thin curtains, I could smell coffee brewing downstairs. Helen was always an early riser, a habit formed during decades of teaching that retirement hadn't managed to break. I found her in the kitchen, still in her robe, reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through something on her tablet. The sight was so ordinary, so reassuringly normal, that I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "Rough night?" she asked, without looking up, somehow sensing my presence. "Is it that obvious?" She glanced at me over her glasses, taking in what I imagined were dark circles and probably tangled hair. "You look like you wrestled with your pillow and lost." I poured myself coffee from the pot, grateful for the familiar ritual. The kitchen was exactly as it had been when I was growing up. The same yellow walls and white cabinets, the same chip in the Formica countertop where Helen had once dropped a cast-iron skillet. Being here felt like stepping back in time, to a place where problems were simpler and solutions came from mothers who knew everything. "I kept thinking about all the conversations Patricia and I have had over the years," I said, settling into the chair across from her. Wondering how many times I shared something personal that she later twisted into ammunition. Helen set down her tablet and gave me her full attention. "Such as? Remember when Robert and I went through that rough patch about 5 years ago? When he was working so much overtime and we barely saw each other?" The memory felt vulnerable to share, even now. I was feeling lonely, disconnected. Patricia was the one I talked to about it. That's what friends are for. But what if she took those conversations and used them to paint a picture of me as needy, as someone who made unreasonable demands on her husband? I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug, seeking comfort from its heat. She knew intimate details about our relationship, things that could sound damaging out of context. Helen was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Did Robert know you talked to her about your problems?" "Of course. He encouraged it, actually. Said it was healthy for me to have someone to confide in." The irony wasn't lost on me. He trusted her judgment. We both did. The back door opened, bringing a rush of cool morning air and the sound of Sarah's voice. "Mom?" "I brought bagels and the latest intelligence." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair pulled back in a ponytail, carrying a paper bag that smelled like everything bagels and cream cheese. But her expression was serious, lacking its usual morning cheerfulness. "What kind of intelligence?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Sarah set the bag on the counter and turned to face me. "I drove past the church on my way to the bakery. Patricia's car was already in the parking lot." "At 7:30 in the morning?" Helen frowned. What could she possibly be doing there so early? "That's what worries me," Sarah said. "It looked like she was waiting for someone." "The church doesn't open for regular activities until 9. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Pastor Williams sometimes gets there early to prepare for the day. He likes the quiet time before the office gets busy." The implications hung heavy in the air between us. Patricia wasn't just spreading rumors through casual conversation. She was being strategic, calculated. Getting to Pastor Williams before our scheduled meeting, potentially having one last opportunity to shape his perception of me. "We don't know that's what she's doing," Helen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't we?" I stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Helen's small backyard. The garden was preparing for winter, the last chrysanthemums holding on despite the recent frost. This is exactly what she would do. She knows I'm meeting with him today, knows that her influence over him is probably the most important weapon she has. Sarah joined me at the window, her reflection overlapping with mine in the glass. "Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe she'll overplay her hand, say something that makes Pastor Williams suspicious of her motives. Or maybe she'll be subtle and sympathetic, expressing just the right amount of concern for my well-being while suggesting I might need professional help to deal with my grief and anger." The thought made me feel sick. Patricia had had months to perfect her approach, to figure out exactly which emotional buttons to push. She knew Pastor Williams well enough to understand what would resonate with him, what would seem plausible coming from a concerned friend. "I feel like I'm walking into an ambush," I said quietly. Helen appeared beside us, her warm hand finding my shoulder. Then we changed the terms of engagement. I turned to look at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "You're thinking like a victim, like someone who has to defend herself against accusations." Her voice carried the firm authority that had once commanded classrooms full of teenagers. "But you have something Patricia doesn't have." "Which is?" "The truth, and 37 years of Pastor Williams knowing exactly who you are." Sarah nodded slowly. "Mom's right. Patricia may think she's been clever, but she's been building a house of cards. All you have to do is tell Pastor Williams what you've discovered." "But what if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm being paranoid or vindictive?" Helen squeezed my shoulder. "Then he's not the man of God we thought he was. But I don't think that's going to happen." As we stood there together, 3 generations of women who had weathered their share of storms, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but it was being joined by something else. Something that felt like determination. Patricia might have gotten to the church first this morning, but she had no idea what was coming. The drive to the church felt different this time. Instead of the crushing anxiety I'd carried for weeks, I found myself mentally organizing my thoughts, preparing for what felt less like a defense and more like finally setting the record straight. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to catch Pastor Williams before Patricia's poison had time to fully work its way through his system. The church parking lot held only 3 cars, and I recognized one as belonging to the custodial staff. No sign of Patricia's silver sedan, which gave me a small measure of relief. Pastor Williams was in his office, door open, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what looked like Sunday's sermon notes. He looked up when I knocked on the doorframe, and his smile seemed genuine, if perhaps a bit more cautious than usual. "Margaret, come in." "Please, sit down." He gestured to the familiar chairs where we'd had so many conversations over the years. "I was sorry to have to reschedule yesterday. Emergency pastoral calls have a way of disrupting even the best-laid plans." "I understand completely." I settled into the chair, studying his face for any signs of whatever Patricia might have shared with him. "Actually, that's part of why I wanted to meet with you. I've discovered something that I think you need to know about." He leaned back slightly, his expression growing more serious. "Oh?" "It concerns Patricia Morrison and some things she's been saying about me around the church." I kept my voice steady, drawing on the strength Helen and Sarah had helped me find that morning. "I have reason to believe she's been spreading rumors about my marriage, about David leaving me." Pastor Williams removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. It was a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he needed a moment to think. "That's a serious accusation, Margaret." "I know it is, and I wouldn't make it lightly." I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed emails Helen had helped me organize. "I have evidence, written communications, where she admits to telling people that David left because I was impossible to live with." The silence stretched between us as he put his glasses back on and accepted the papers. I watched his face as he read, seeing his expression shift from polite attention to genuine concern, then to something that looked like disappointment. "These are quite troubling," he said finally, looking up at me. "May I ask how you came to have copies of Patricia's private communications?" The question I'd been dreading. They were shared with me by someone who felt I had a right to know what was being said about me. I met his eyes directly. I realize that raises ethical questions. But Pastor Williams, I've been watching my reputation in this church community slowly dissolve, and I couldn't understand why. People have been treating me differently, avoiding me, and I've been blaming myself, thinking maybe I was being too sensitive or difficult. He nodded slowly, setting the papers aside. I can see how distressing this must have been for you. But I have to ask, have you spoken to Patricia directly about this? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first because I suspect she may have already approached you about me. Has she? Another pause, longer this time. Pastor Williams had always been careful about confidentiality, but something in his expression told me I'd guessed correctly. Patricia did come to see me this morning, actually. She expressed some concerns about your emotional well-being, suggested that you might benefit from grief counseling, or perhaps some professional support during this transition period. The words hit exactly as I'd expected them to, but somehow they stung less than I'd anticipated. Maybe because Helen was right? Maybe because I was finally seeing the full picture of Patricia's campaign against me. And did she mention that these concerns came from intimate knowledge of my marriage? Did she suggest that my husband's departure was somehow justified by my behavior? Pastor Williams looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Margaret, I think perhaps it would be best if I arranged for the three of us to sit down together and discuss this openly. With respect, Pastor Williams, I don't think that's wise. Not yet, anyway. I leaned forward slightly. Patricia doesn't know that I'm aware of what she's been doing. If we confront her directly, she'll simply deny everything, claim she was misunderstood or taken out of context. But I think there might be others who can speak to the pattern of behavior these emails reveal. What do you mean? I mean, Patricia has been doing this for a while, and I doubt I'm the only person she's targeted. If you could quietly reach out to a few trusted members of the congregation, people who might have heard some of these stories or witnessed her spreading them, we might get a clearer picture of the scope of the situation. Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with the implications of what I was suggesting. Finally, he spoke. Margaret, I've known you for a very long time. I've seen you handle genuine crises with grace and strength. If you tell me that Patricia Morrison has been deliberately damaging your reputation in this community, I'm inclined to believe you. He paused, glancing at the papers again. But this puts us all in a very delicate position. I understand that. But Pastor Williams, I can't let this continue. It's not just about my reputation anymore. If Patricia is willing to do this to me, she's probably done it to others. This is about the health and integrity of our entire church community. As I spoke those words, I realized how much my perspective had shifted since that morning. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about protecting others from what Patricia had done to me. But as I watched Pastor Williams's expression grow more troubled, I wondered if I had just set something in motion that none of us would be able to control. Pastor Williams set the papers down carefully on his desk, his fingers drumming against the wood in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The silence stretched between us until I could hear the old heating system clicking somewhere in the walls of the church office. Margaret, what you're asking me to do essentially amounts to conducting an investigation within my own congregation, he said finally. I need to think very carefully about the implications of that. I understand your position is difficult, I replied. But consider this. If Patricia has been spreading false information about me, and potentially others, isn't that something the church leadership should address? Isn't that exactly the kind of behavior that damages the trust and fellowship we're supposed to be building here? He rubbed his temples, looking suddenly much older than his 60-some years. You're absolutely right, of course. It's just that in 30 years of ministry, I've learned that once you start pulling at threads like this, sometimes the whole fabric unravels. Or sometimes you discover that the fabric was already damaged and needs honest repair. I countered. Pastor Williams looked at me with something that might have been admiration. You've given this considerable thought. I've had to. Pastor Williams, when I walked out of Helen's house this morning, I was devastated. I felt like my entire world had crumbled, but the more I've processed this, the more I realize that what Patricia did to me was calculated and deliberate. She didn't just share concerns about a friend. She systematically worked to isolate me from my support system during one of the most difficult periods of my life. And you believe she's done this before? I thought about the precision of Patricia's campaign, the way she'd known exactly which people to approach and what stories would resonate with each of them. I think someone learns to be this effective through practice. Pastor Williams was quiet again, and I could see him weighing options in his mind. Finally, he spoke. If I were to make some discreet inquiries, it would need to be handled very carefully. I couldn't mention your name or the specific allegations. I would simply be checking in with certain members about the general climate in our church community, perhaps asking if there have been any concerns about gossip or rumors. That sounds reasonable. But Margaret, I need you to understand something. If what you're telling me is true, and if there are indeed other instances of this behavior, we're going to face some very difficult decisions as a church community. Patricia Morrison has been a member here for over 15 years. She's served on multiple committees, contributed significantly to our fundraising efforts, and has many close relationships within the congregation. The weight of what he was saying settled over me. Are you telling me that her standing in the church might protect her from consequences? I'm telling you that human nature is complicated, and people don't always respond to uncomfortable truths in the ways we hope they will, he said gently. Some members might choose to believe that this is all a misunderstanding, or that both parties share responsibility for what happened. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was different now. Cleaner, somehow. More focused. So Patricia might face no real consequences for what she's done. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that justice doesn't always look the way we think it should, especially in a community setting like this. Pastor Williams leaned forward. But Margaret, I want you to know that regardless of how others respond, I believe what you've told me. These emails paint a very clear picture of deliberate character assassination. That behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and it will be addressed. Thank you for saying that. The question is how to address it most effectively. If I confront Patricia directly based on what you've shared, she could claim that the emails were taken out of context, or that Helen misunderstood her intentions. She might even argue that she was genuinely concerned about your well-being and was simply seeking advice from mutual friends about how to help you. I could hear Patricia making exactly those arguments, probably with tears in her eyes and wounded dignity in her voice. You're right. She's had weeks to perfect her narrative. A direct confrontation might just give her the opportunity to refine it further. Exactly. But if there are other instances, other people who have witnessed this pattern of behavior, then we have a stronger foundation for addressing the real issue. Pastor Williams picked up the papers again, scanning them briefly. Margaret, these emails span nearly a month. That's a sustained campaign of character assassination. If Patricia has done this before, there will be evidence. And if there are other victims, they deserve to know they're not alone. The word victims struck me oddly. I hadn't thought of myself that way, but I suppose that's what I was, what I am. How long do you think it will take to make these inquiries? A week, perhaps 2. I'll need to be very careful about how I approach this. But Margaret, I need to ask you something difficult. I braced myself. Are you prepared for the possibility that confronting this situation might result in you losing friendships? That some people might choose Patricia's version of events over yours, regardless of the evidence? The question hit harder than I'd expected. I thought about the women I'd considered close friends, the book club meetings I'd looked forward to, the casual conversations after church services that had made me feel connected to my community. I've already lost them, haven't I? I said quietly. Patricia made sure of that. At least this way, I'll know who I really was friends with and who was just available for entertainment. Pastor Williams studied my face carefully. You sound different than you did when you first walked in here. I feel different. Clearer, maybe. I thought about how I'd felt that morning, crushed and desperate. I think I spent the first part of today grieving what I thought I'd lost. But now I'm realizing that what I've actually lost are illusions, and maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. That's a very mature perspective. Well, I'm getting a crash course in seeing people as they really are, rather than as I hoped they were. I managed a small smile. It's painful, but it's also oddly liberating. Pastor Williams nodded slowly. Margaret, I'm going to make those inquiries, but I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me that whatever we discover, whatever happens next, you won't let this experience close your heart to genuine friendship. Patricia Morrison's behavior says everything about her character and nothing about yours. Don't let her poison your ability to trust completely. I felt unexpectedly moved by his words. I'll try. Good. He stood, and I followed suit. I'll be in touch within the week. And Margaret, I think you should know that your decision to bring this forward took considerable courage. A lot of people would have just quietly left the church and tried to start over somewhere else. I thought about that, I admitted. But running away wouldn't have stopped Patricia from doing this to someone else. As I walked toward the door, Pastor Williams called my name. I turned back. One more thing. Helen Carver mentioned that you've been staying with her temporarily? Yes. How is that arrangement working out? I thought about Helen's fierce loyalty that morning, her immediate anger on my behalf, the way she'd insisted I take action rather than simply accept what had happened. Helen has been exactly the friend I needed her to be. Pastor Williams smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him since I'd arrived. Good friendships have a way of revealing themselves during difficult times, don't they? As I left the church office and walked back toward my car, I realized that despite everything I'd learned about Patricia's betrayal, despite the uncertainty of what Pastor Williams might discover, I felt more hopeful than I had in weeks. But as I reached for my car door handle, I saw a familiar figure walking across the parking lot toward me, and my newfound sense of clarity was immediately tested. Patricia Morrison was heading straight for me, and from the determined expression on her face, she had something important to say. My heart started pounding as Patricia approached, and for a moment I considered simply getting in my car and driving away. But then I remembered Pastor Williams' words about courage and Helen's insistence that I stop letting people walk all over me. I straightened my shoulders and waited. Margaret! Patricia called out when she was still several feet away, her voice carrying that familiar tone of concerned friendship that I now recognized as completely artificial. I'm so glad I caught you. I was hoping we could talk. Were you? I kept my voice level, though my hands were trembling slightly. That's interesting, considering you've apparently been talking about me plenty without me being present. Patricia's step faltered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you know exactly what I mean. I was amazed at how calm I sounded when everything inside me was churning. I know about the conversations you've been having, about how you've been explaining my husband's departure to anyone who would listen. For a long moment, Patricia just stared at me. I watched her face carefully, looking for some sign of shame or regret. Some indication that the friend I'd thought I knew was still in there somewhere. Instead, I saw her expression shift into something I'd never noticed before. A kind of cold assessment, as if she was rapidly calculating her next move. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said finally, taking a step closer. "If someone told you I said something inappropriate, they must have misheard or taken it out of context. You know how church gossip can get twisted." "Church gossip," I repeated the words slowly. "Is that what you're calling it?" "I'm calling it a misunderstanding that's clearly upset you." Patricia's voice took on that soothing, slightly condescending tone I now realized she'd used with me countless times before. "Why don't we go get coffee and talk this through?" I hate the idea that you're hurt over something that was probably just miscommunication. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, caught in her lies, she was trying to manipulate me into doubting what I knew to be true. She was suggesting that I was the problem, that I was overreacting, that I should be grateful for her willingness to smooth things over. "No," I said quietly. "No? No, Patricia. I'm not going to go get coffee with you. I'm not going to pretend this is a misunderstanding. And I'm not going to let you convince me that I'm imagining things or being oversensitive." My voice was getting stronger with each word. "I know what you said. I know what you've been telling people about me, about my marriage, about why Robert left." Patricia's mask was slipping now. The concerned friend expression was fading, replaced by something harder. "Margaret, I think you're being dramatic. If I mentioned your situation to anyone, it was only because I was worried about you and trying to get you support. By telling people I was impossible to live with? I never said that." But her response came too quickly, too defensively, and we both knew it. "Didn't you?" I stepped closer to her now, and she actually took a step back. "Because that's exactly what Helen heard. Not from some anonymous gossip chain, Patricia. From you. Directly from you." Something ugly flashed across Patricia's features. "Helen Carver has never liked me. If she told you I said something, she was probably just trying to cause trouble." And there it was. The final piece of clarity I needed. Patricia wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to acknowledge what she'd done. Instead, she was going to try to turn me against Helen, the one person who'd actually stood by me through this nightmare. "You know what the saddest part of this is?" I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "For weeks, I've been blaming myself for not being a better friend to you. I thought maybe if I'd been more supportive, more available, you wouldn't have felt the need to discuss my personal business with everyone. But you're not sorry at all, are you?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you want me to say, Margaret. I've tried to be a good friend to you, especially since Robert left. If you want to believe Helen Carver's version of events over mine, that's your choice." "You're right," I said. "It is my choice. And I choose to believe the friend who's never lied to me over the one who's standing here lying to me right now." For a moment, Patricia's composure cracked completely. "You have no idea what it's been like, watching you play the victim all these months. Poor Margaret, abandoned by her husband. Poor Margaret, struggling to make ends meet. Do you know how exhausting it is to keep pretending to care?" The words hit like a physical blow, but strangely, they also brought a sense of relief. Finally, The truth. There it is, I said softly. Finally, something honest from you. Patricia seemed to realize what she'd revealed, and her face flushed. Margaret, I didn't mean… Yes, you did. I opened my car door. You meant every word. And you know what? I'm grateful you finally said it out loud. It makes this so much easier. Makes what easier? I got into my car and rolled down the window. Letting go of the friendship I thought we had. I started the engine. Goodbye, Patricia. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing in the same spot, watching me drive away. But instead of the satisfaction I might have expected from finally confronting her, I felt something else entirely. A profound sadness for the person she'd revealed herself to be, and an unexpected sense of freedom. My phone rang as I turned onto the main road. Helen's name appeared on the display, and I realized I was actually looking forward to telling her about this conversation. But when I answered, Helen's voice was tense with urgency. Margaret, where are you? You need to get back here right now. We have a problem. The urgency in Helen's voice sent ice through my veins. I pulled over immediately, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. What kind of problem? Helen, you're scaring me. It's about Robert, Helen said, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing like she did when she was agitated. He showed up at your house about 20 minutes ago. I was just leaving after watering your plants, and there he was, standing on your porch with boxes. My stomach dropped. Boxes? Margaret, he had a key. He was letting himself in like he still lived there. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was collecting some things he'd forgotten, and that Patricia had told him you wouldn't be home this afternoon. The betrayal hit me all over again, but sharper this time. Patricia hadn't just been spreading rumors about me. She'd been in contact with Robert, giving him information about my schedule. Where is he now? I asked, already making an U-turn to head back home. That's the thing. He's still there. I told him I thought he should wait until you got back, and he got really defensive. Started saying it was still half his house and he had every right to be there. Margaret, I didn't know what to do, so I called my son. You called David? I know. I should have asked first, but Robert was getting aggressive, and I was worried about leaving him there alone in your house. David's on his way over now. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my mind racing. The last thing I wanted was a confrontation between Robert and David, but I was grateful Helen had thought quickly. The idea of Robert going through my house, taking whatever he wanted while I wasn't there, made me feel violated all over again. I'm 10 minutes away, I said. Helen, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you looking out for me. Don't thank me yet. There's more. Helen's voice dropped lower. Margaret, when I walked in on him, he wasn't just in the living room getting books or clothes. He was in your bedroom, going through your jewelry box. The betrayal crystallized into something harder. Rage. My jewelry box contained my grandmother's wedding ring, the pearl earrings my mother had given me, pieces that had nothing to do with our marriage and everything to do with my family history. That son of a… I caught myself, taking a deep breath. Okay, I'm almost there. Is he still inside? Yes, but David just pulled up. Oh no. Margaret, they're both going up to the front door now. I could hear voices in the background, David's deeper tone mixing with another voice I recognized all too well. Robert's, pitched higher than usual, defensive. Put me on speaker, I said. I want to hear what's happening. Margaret, I don't think… Helen, please. It's my house. and I have a right to know what's being said in it." There was a pause, then the sound quality changed as Helen switched to speakerphone. David's voice came through clearly, calm but firm. "Look, Robert, I'm not trying to cause problems here, but my mom called me because she was concerned about you being here when Margaret wasn't home. Maybe it would be better if you waited until she got back?" "David, right?" Robert's voice was strained, trying for friendly, but missing the mark. "Look, I appreciate your mom looking out for Margaret, but this is between me and my wife, ex-wife, whatever. I'm just getting some things that belong to me." "What things?" David asked, and I could hear the skepticism in his tone. There was a pause. "Personal items, things from before we were married, family stuff." That was a lie, and we all knew it. Robert's family had been gone for years, and anything that had belonged to them was long since disposed of at his own request. "Dad?" My heart stopped. That was David, but he wasn't talking to Robert. He was talking to someone else. But that was impossible. David's father had been Helen's husband, and he died 3 years ago. Then I realized what had happened. In my panic, I'd misunderstood something. But no. I could hear Helen's sharp intake of breath through the phone, and I knew she was just as confused as I was. "Helen," I said urgently. "What's happening?" "Who's David talking to?" "Margaret," Helen whispered. "I think I made a mistake about something. Robert, he's not alone." My blood ran cold. Through the phone's speaker, I could hear shuffling footsteps and Robert's voice again, but this time addressing someone else entirely. "Just wait in the car, okay? This won't take long." "Robert." David's voice was sharper now. "Who else is with you?" There was a pause that stretched too long. Helen whispered into the phone. "Margaret, there's a woman getting back into a car in your driveway. I can see her through your front window." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about Robert taking my things or even trying to get back at me. He'd brought someone else, probably whoever he'd been seeing, to my house, to the home we'd shared. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, not caring if my voice carried through Helen's speakerphone. I was 3 blocks away now, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. David's voice came through again, and I could hear the controlled anger building. "You know what, Robert? I think you need to leave, now." "Look, kid, I don't need permission from you or your mother to be in my own house." "It's not your house anymore." David's voice was steady, but I knew him well enough to hear the warning underneath. "And Margaret's not here to speak for herself, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave until she gets back." "David." Helen's voice was closer to the phone now. "Maybe we should just wait for Margaret." "No," I said firmly, making the final turn onto my street. I could see my house now, Helen's car in her driveway, David's truck parked behind an unfamiliar sedan. "I'm here. I'm pulling up now." I ended the call and sat in my car for just a moment, watching the scene unfold through my front windows. I could see Robert's silhouette gesturing animatedly, David standing with his arms crossed, and Helen moving toward my front door. In the sedan, I could make out the shadow of someone waiting. The fury that had been building during the drive crystallized into something clearer. Determination. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't going to let Robert rewrite the narrative anymore. Not to our mutual friends, not to my neighbors, and certainly not in my own house. I got out of my car and walked up my own driveway, my keys already in my hand.